So good morning everyone. I am Joshua Espalias. So for the policy research,
Nakurot na mga balibo ni Mingay.
next slide please. So the global temperature records are being continually broken. Last July was the hottest month in history. According to the World Meteorological Organization or the WMO, the 5-year period in 2015 and 2019 is about to become the hottest of all time. Scientists may say that this type of the phenomenon is becoming more probable and more persistent, and this is partly down to the climate change. So, the definition for the climate change is, and it affects, so the climate change affects millions of people across the world, especially the most vulnerable, by increasing the frequency and virulence of the extreme meteorological phenomena that causes material damage and population displacement. So global warming is also the cause of the greatest environmental crisis in history due to the unprecedented speed with which it has unfolded. Since 1880, the average global temperature has increased by 0.85 degrees Celsius. Sea level rises by 19 centimeter, and the Arctic has lost 1.7 million in kilometer of ice per decade, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on the Climate Change or the IPCC. Next slide, please. So the difference between the climate change mitigation strategies and climate change adaptation is that mitigation is aimed in tackling the causes and minimizing the possible impacts of climate change, whereas adaptation looks at how to reduce the negative effects it has and how to make advantage of any opportunities that arises. So for the measures of mitigating and adaptation to climate change. The first is to improve energy efficiency and opting for renewable energy over fossil fuels, promoting public transport and sustainable mobility by increasing the numbers of journeys in towns by bicycle, reducing the number of flights and taking more trips by train or in shared cars, promoting ecological industry, agriculture, fishing, and livestock farming, food sustainability, responsible consumption, and the third R's is reduce, reuse, and recycle. By taxing the use of fuels and carbon dioxide emissions markets. So for the mitigation, erecting buildings and infrastructure that is safer and more sustainable, replanting forests and restoring damaged ecosystem, diversifying crops so that they are better able to adapt to changing climates, investigating and developing innovative solutions to prevent and manage natural catastrophes, and developing action plans for climate emergencies. So next slide, please. So for the policy for disaster risk management, so first is we need to define the risk management. So disaster risk management is the application of disaster risk reduction policies and strategies to prevent disaster risk, reduce existing disaster risk, and manage residual risk, contributing to strengthening of resilience and reduction of disaster losses. The DRRM Act of 2010 and the Climate Change Act of 2009 have explicitly indicated environmental protection provisions, the monitoring of which is mandated to which is mandated to N wala pa ko, which is mandated to NDRRMC and Department of Interior and Local Government Unit or the LDILG, Department of Environmental and Natural Resources or So for the implementation, legislation, policy, and scope, and its purpose. So the government of the Philippines will implement the policy is the Local Government Code of 1991, and the purpose is aimed to achieve decentralization by increased stakeholder participation through for civil policies and allocated national powers and responsibilities to LGUs. The Bureau of Fire Protection, the revised code of the Philippines in 2008, purpose is to assign authority to BFP to issue rules and regulations regulate relating for fire management to oversee national fire safety across the sectors. Next slide, please. And the legislation policy, the Local Government Code of 1991, its purpose is to achieve decentralization by increased stakeholder participation through for civil societies and allocated national powers and responsibilities to LGU. Kung nagbalik lagi ni Tik. For the next policy is the Calamity Hazard Mitigation Program Act of 2010. Purpose is requires the PHIVOLCS and PAG-ASA to establish natural calamities hazard mitigation program for all coastal areas to perform hazard monitoring, assessment, and early warnings. The Department of Disaster Resilience and the policy is Department of Disaster Resilience Act of 2018 mandates the creation of Department of Disaster Resilience advised by the National Disaster Resilience Council to mainstream disaster and climate risk reduction across sectors and stakeholders to focus on local resilience and on proactive recovery, rehabilitation, and building back better. Next slide. The Climate Change Act of 2009, or the Republic Act number 9729, purpose is to monitor and evaluate the national programs and action plans to guarantee mainstreaming of climate risk with consideration across sectors operated under the autonomous CCC. The Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010, extending Decree 1566, focusing on the proactive disaster and climate risk reduction and management by participation of all levels and sectors, a whole of society approach which includes consideration to gender and indigenous people. And that's all.